everyone. This is David Perry, and I'm delighted to once again be working with the National Association of Corporate Directors, NorCal. And we are going to, as we did last year, start conversations and dialogues about diversity, equity, inclusion in the boardroom. And coinciding with October 11th, National Coming Out Day, we are discussing this with members of the LGBT community that serve on corporate boards in the corporate sector. Today, I'm speaking with Dan Swisher, who is the president of Jazz Pharma. Dan, welcome to the Zoom room.
Yeah, thanks, David. Thanks for having me.
So when we were talking with directors last year, it was, at least here in California, a more hopeful time, with California laws mandating underrepresented groups to be placed on California corporate boards. Now it seems that those laws have been challenged and struck down. Do you think that the momentum will be kept up in any way, or have things really changed?
I think things have really changed, and momentum will be kept up. I serve on two outside boards, Corcept Therapeutics and Cirrus, and been involved with the board at the board level and the corporate governance committee level, and thinking about our board makeup and diversity, and it's just sort of good practice to have more diverse views around that board table. So I think, at least for the progressive companies, nothing changes. There's just momentum. I think for the less progressive companies, or sort of a willingness to wait longer, this might mean that it takes longer for action to happen. So it's a slight setback, but not significant in my point of view.
Right. Before we get into some more specifics about where we are now and where we go forward in general, talk to me a little bit about your journey in pharmaceuticals professionally, and also personally, how being an out gay man has impacted that work and continues to impact that work.
So I got into pharmaceuticals after Stanford Business School back in 1991, a year at Baxter, and then I came and worked at Alza Pharmaceuticals for about 10 years before through the acquisition of J&J. Moved over to sort of a senior role at a venture-backed private company called Sunesis Pharmaceuticals, then became the CEO, took the company public, went through a lot of mostly R&D organization, lots of fundraising, and had my own sort of things about forming the right kind of board and right input, et cetera. And about 4.5 years ago, I moved over to be the president at Jazz Pharmaceuticals, which is a fairly large size company based in Dublin, 3,000 employees, rising revenue, et cetera. And then I serve on two outside boards. So that's been kind of my life science experience. In terms of being gay, I've only been self-identified gay for about a year. So it's kind of a new chapter in my life. And so I was serving on those board members as a non-gay member. This year I'm serving openly as gay. It's just sort of, I'm thinking more broadly about my future in terms of kind of post-COVID, et cetera, and trying to bring my whole self to whether it's the boardroom or the executive room.
Specifically in your industry of pharmaceuticals, what trends do you see in terms for board directorships with inclusion across the board, but specifically with the representation from the LGBT community? And would you recommend others to position their skill sets in a way that may not be traditional?
David, just to kind of push on that a little bit, what do you mean by not traditional?
Well, I guess in a sense where we're talking about not traditional, we only have to look at board makeup to see that still most boards are white, straight men, not even women. So to your point about bringing your whole self to a board commitment, how much does a member of the LGBT community lean forward with their community representation when they put themselves forward or are nominated for board leadership?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely kind of a personal journey, and how much people are self-identifying and sharing that more freely. But in most of the boards, and the boards you want to be part of, being your full self and sharing who you fully are and who you're representing and sort of the insights you have, I think it's going to be a plus for most boards. But again, it's got to be the right personal balance between, like for myself, when I came out to family and some close friends about a year ago, I wanted a little bit of time for self-discovery and to ensure, what journey was I really on before, being more public. So it was a good 6 months before I was sharing that with the boards I was on. And I joined as a straight white male, so they didn't know anything about diversity. At that time, I was sort of fighting against their criteria. And so I just wanted to help them know that, they've got sort of broader diversity than they might have otherwise expected.
Right. Are there any examples of times this year that you felt hopeful about changes in the boardroom? For example, when Disney spoke out about the quote unquote "Don't Say Gay" bill situation in Florida and found out that the board chair was LGBTQ, and the board stood behind the CO and took a very public political stance. Do you have any other examples of issues like that at the corporate level that you're aware of or that made you feel hopeful, or maybe conversely not so hopeful?
Not at the corporate side, I would say, it's just in part because, we're not trying to segregate our lives and live, our corporate life, our personal life, our, what's going on in the environment, et cetera. And I think even the trend with ESG of it's not just a paper checking exercise. It's really about how are we going to be a better corporate citizen and help drive positive transformation and change. And, it's good because we feel all good about that, but it's also good from a business perspective because it retains and attracts the right kind of talent into the organization, as well as, shareholders, et cetera. So I think the same thing when it comes to, diversity in the board and standing behind, a more sort of progressive perspective, while still, of course, you've got sort of business objectives as well. The only thing that gives me concern is more the political backlash, that comes with some of those things, particularly when there wants to be cultural war politics, at play to sort of further segregate each of us, or polarize, each of us rather than bring us together.
What advice would you give a prospective board member who was LGBTQ coming onto a corporate board, or frankly coming onto your board or one of the boards on which you sit? Especially if it was their first board as an openly gay person.
It's hard for me to be exactly in those shoes since my journey was so much later and I was already on the board. But I would just say, there's two ways to go. One is that they can be very visibly, a member of the LGBTQ and they want to serve on a board and everybody's aware of that, or not, depending on what their perspective is. But I think in general, it's going to be a positive with most boards. And people do want that broader perspective, whether it's, again, gender balance, people of color, as well as LGBTQ, sexual orientation. The more diversity you have, the better team you've got. And that's true whether it's in the boardroom or on a project team.
So last question, why is diversity a good economic decision for corporate boards?
It shows, research has shown, and I've seen it in my own sort of experience, that if you set up the right, one, it's having the diversity of view, experience, and perspective to weigh in on really significant topics. And then it's a question of inclusion, making sure that everybody around that table has a strong voice, has an equal voice, because you could have diversity without inclusion, and that's not going to get you anywhere. So you really need both. You need a good inclusive environment where, people are bringing their full selves. You're really hearing, different perspectives, and then you're aligning as a board behind, the best outcome and best decision.
Great, Dan. Thank you so much for speaking with us. In closing, is there anything you would like to say, or anything that you would like to speak on that I haven't asked you that maybe I should have, about the issue of LGBTQ inclusion specifically in the corporate board environment?
Yeah, I'm an optimist by nature. I think being in the life science business, you have to imagine there's better and better cures that you can get behind. And I think the same thing when it comes to dynamics in the boardroom. We've made huge progress over the last 5-10 years. There's a lot more awareness of how these dynamics align with better corporate practice and what's going to lead to better outcomes too, and ultimately getting to better medicines for patients. So I see this as a virtual cycle that will continue, and maybe there's going to be the occasional political setback, but nothing significant to slow down the momentum.
Great. Dan Swisher of Jazz Pharma, it's been a great pleasure speaking with you today. This is David Perry on behalf of the National Association of Corporate Directors, Northern California.